You think the rules don't apply to the golden boy?
Brilliance makes up for a lot.
Don't alienate the only people in the world that understand what you do.
The bigger the star, the more violent its demise. Their gravity gets so concentrated it swallows everything. And now I have become death, destroyer of worlds.
What is the point of feeling guilty? In a 2020 paper published by the Royal Society, guilt is defined, by citing a variety of other writings, as a social, other-oriented emotion that has a potentially positive function within social interaction by stimulating pro-social behaviors from others and also promoting actions towards those who have been wronged. In other words, as humans are social creatures and thus desire social bonds, guilt is an emotion used to let us know when we have done something that is bad, prompting us to then do something about it. Simple enough to understand and deal with when you're a hunter-gatherer who's stolen your neighbor's bird eggs. But when you're responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, the metaphorical and literal scarring of an entire nation, is it even possible to imagine that kind of guilt? Are we even capable of imagining that kind of crime, processing that kind of shame? What do you do about that? What can you do about that, if anything? There's a line in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer that stuck with me ever since I saw it, and that is,
You don't get to commit the sin and then have us all feel sorry for you that it had consequences.
This line, spoken by his wife Kitty after the suicide of Robert's lover, echoes throughout the film. The portrayal of Robert, his guilt and his responsibility for the advent of nuclear weaponry and the subsequent reverberations throughout history, is interesting, to say the least. Those closest to him, namely the women in his life, are always the ones seemingly bringing him down to earth. It's with them some of his most damaging flaws become most apparent, his messy, at times toxic relationships with them almost humanizing him.
You have everyone convinced you're more complicated than you actually are.
This is in stark contrast to almost everyone else, really. His colleagues, his friends, his enemies all speak with and about him like he's a prophet, a god, a piece of forbidden knowledge descended from Eden. Even when criticizing him or pointing out his flaws, they're always framed in a way that makes them seem more like compliments.
Because you're not just self-important, you're actually important.
Genius is no guarantee of wisdom. How could this man who saw so much be so blind?
Robert, you see beyond the world we live in. There is a price to be paid for that.
In this elevation to divinity, Robert is in a sense relieved of some of his responsibility for the consequences of his actions. His anxiety attacks as a young man are framed as glimpses into the subatomic, the particles and waves that weave together the fabric of the universe. Visions of dying stars that almost act as premonitions of the bomb, as if the weapon's birth is as inevitable as the collapse of a sun. There's a lot that those around Robert say to justify the development of TRiiNiTY, including Robert himself. It's better we develop the bomb than the Nazis. We have no choice but to before they do. Using the bomb will definitively end the war. We're just making the thing. How it gets used is out of our hands. They deny themselves their agency to absolve themselves of their responsibility. One of the most repeated excuses is, once the world sees the horrific power of the bomb, no one will ever even consider using one again. It will be the end of the war to end all war. Of course, you only have to look at history to know that suffering is possibly the worst teacher out there. Just as Robert's prophethood elevates him above responsibility in some ways, it also forces it upon him in wholly new ones. And when the bomb actually drops, and the weight of what has actually happened finally sinks in, all those excuses are suddenly as screams in the wind. It's from this point on that the line, "You don't get to commit the sin and then have us all feel sorry for you that it had consequences," rears its head again. He professes his guilt to President Truman, who in response says, "Lol. Get over yourself, bitch." Strauss alleges that Robert's guilt is the desired guilt of the self-important, the fetish of a martyr, an excuse that allows him to continue thinking he's a good person who just made some bad choices. And Strauss, with his vengeful maneuvering against Robert, his kangaroo court set up to ruin his credibility, gives him that excuse. And with the political drama dominating the latter third of the runtime, I'm almost tempted to say the film does as well, at times feeling like an underdog story about Oppie the scientist being unfairly prosecuted by the jealous, egotistical Strauss, and yeah, he kind of is. The hearing is an obvious stitch-up, taking place during a time when people thought you were a Marxist if you grew your beard too long. But then that line pops back in my head. You don't get to commit the sin and then have us all feel sorry for you that it had consequences. So what if he got a political knife in the back? So what if he tried to avoid an arms race? So what if he felt bad? At the end of the day, he's still the man who made the most destructive weapon the world had ever seen up to that point, in the process blowing the door open for even worse ones to follow. So I wonder once more, what is the point of feeling guilty when what you feel shame over is so incomprehensibly awful it can never be atoned for? Is it still important to show that regret, knowing it won't make any difference, but knowing it's the right thing to do? Maybe, though admittedly, sometimes I wonder if such a display would be more for yourself than anyone else. If it would actually be more respectable to just not even bother with the pretense, to just wear that shame like a badge. Yeah, I killed thousands. I might kill billions. What do you want me to do about it? Honestly, I don't know. A part of me doesn't even think there's an answer at all. It might be one of those questions where the fact that it's being asked in the first place shows that we're too far gone. A big thank you to my patrons for their support, especially Michael Coolwood. If you want to support me while also getting access to things like behind the scenes stuff, music and credits and videos, then be sure to pledge to my Patreon. Also, the music in this video will be available for streaming and purchase in the description as well. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.